Hi, this is International Master David Pruess for Chess.com, and today you're going to learn a very, very important lesson, which is how to checkmate with king and queen against king. If you already know, go take your whining complaints elsewhere, and I'll make a more advanced video for you next time. But if you don't know, gather around, because this is actually one of the most important things to know how to do in chess. Now, the checkmate with queen against king, aided by your own king, is really, really, really fundamental in chess, because a lot of chess games are going to come down to the final pawn. And you're going to have a situation like this, where you've got one pawn left on the board and you manage to get it down to the end, you promote it to a queen, and then you need to get to work checkmating with your queen and king. So let us put the queen back where we want her. All right, so if you have this situation here, which you'll have many times, you want to checkmate with king and queen against king. The first thing that you need to do to be able to get to anything is to know what your destination is and where it is, right? So you can't start making a checkmate unless you know what a checkmating position would look like. Does that make sense? If I start just moving the queen randomly, do you know if I'm getting closer or further to checkmate right now? What if I do this? Do you know if that's closer or further to checkmate? You can't really know unless you know what the checkmate looks like. So the first thing you need to do is you need to try and imagine in your head how you could set up a checkmate with the king and queen against the king. And I suggest that you try and imagine that for yourself before I show you, because that's how you're going to figure out all the other checkmates, right? Is you have to figure out how could the forces I have create checkmate, then what squares would they need to be on, and then try and find a path to that position. So pause your video if you want to imagine how this would look, and I will now show you a couple of checkmates. First of all, really hard to checkmate the king in the center of the board because he's got 8 possible moves, right? So we're going to try and checkmate him either on the side or in the corner. Okay, corner's the easiest, so let's put him over there. Now, our queen won't be able to checkmate by herself, so we should put our king somewhere near him, but not necessarily on him, because that's illegal, right? Kings can't stand next to each other. So we're going to put the king near the opponent's king. Any of these 4 squares that I'm highlighting would do. Okay, so the king's near the opponent's king. And now our king is covering 2 of the 4 squares that we need to cover, right? We need to cover all 3 squares the opponent's king can move to and the square he's on. So that means our queen just needs to cover these 2 squares here. There are a couple ways she can do that, right? One would be if we got her anywhere on this back rank, since she moves sideways, she would cover both squares easily. The other option is to put her next to the opponent's king like this. She'll cover these squares and also this square while being defended by our king. Very important. If the king was over here, it looks like your queen's covering everything she needs to in checkmating the king, but she herself is not defended. And that would be a failure for her. So this is a checkmate, and this is also a checkmate from this square here. She also covers everything she needs to and is defended by the king. If we put the king out in the middle of the board, the checkmates are going to look pretty similar. The best spot for our king will be to cover all 3 spaces in front of the opponent's king. And then if we put our queen on the back rank, that would be checkmate like this, right? Each of them covers 1 rank. Or we could put the queen in front of the opponent's king, and she would cover all 3 squares. But notice that now if she were to the side of the king, she doesn't quite cover all the squares that she needs to. He can escape over here. Also notice that if your king isn't right in front of their king, and you try and do the back rank checkmate, the king can come out to the square here. So you have to be a little bit careful here if they're in the middle, and make sure that you're really covering every square. In the corner, it's a little bit easier. Now let's go all the way back to the beginning and try and move the king towards the side of the board. The one hint that I want to give you right away is that checking your opponent doesn't mean that you're closer to checkmate. Check and checkmate don't actually have that much to do with each other in terms of forcing things. So your opponent's king is best placed in the middle of the board, worst place in the corner, and second worst place on the side. So if you check him, notice how his king is able to stay right where he is in the center, right? We're just checking him, accomplishing nothing. Okay? But now, imagine that in this position, we start off by trying to take away some of these squares from the opponent's king, right? So the first thing you might do is try and take away these two squares with your queen. So you can move her here, and she cuts off those two squares. Now your opponent's king moves here, and you want to take away this square too, right? So actually, instead of checking him, what you're going to continuously do is attack all the squares around him, forcing him further and further out of the center. Now, his king could choose to move this way, and again, we're going to take the last central square away from him, right? So we're going to move our queen here. And now the king could step back, and we're going to move our queen here, cutting off this rank and taking this square away. He moves this way. We come here, and you might see a pattern emerging. So I'm now going to go back and tell you what that pattern is from the very beginning. The pattern is you always want to place your queen a knight's step away from the opponent's king. That way she will cover the most squares that he wants to step on and restrict him the most. So, simple. We move our queen where she's a knight square away from the king. He moves. We go to where she's a knight square away from the king. He moves. And whether he moves sideways or backwards, we always keep this same relation. It's actually never going to be checked. We're always just going to be taking squares away from him. And you see we can do this all the way till we get to the end of the board. And you see I'm pushing the king further and further towards the corner. Now, me personally, once I've got the king on the edge of the board, I don't worry about forcing him into the corner. I would just bring up my king to help with the checkmate. But if you want to force him into the corner, you can do so. But the one thing you need to realize is that you don't want to take away the very final square from him, because this is stalemate, and that is the number one danger in this endgame, is that if you take away every square the king can go on, when you're not checking him, that is a draw by stalemate, and you don't want to do that. So you have to leave him in a cage that's at least 2 squares big. If you leave him in a cage that's only 1 square big, he can't breathe, he asphyxiates, and you don't win the game. What you need to do is leave him in a tiny little cage of 2 by 2, and then march your king up. Right, and he's just stepping back and forth, nothing he can do. Your king knows exactly where he wants to go, right, either of these squares. His king moves here. Now you can choose your flavor of checkmate, right? Back rank or smushmate, right? 2 choices. Now let's quickly do it again. Try and we'll mix it up a little bit. I will just put the white queen here on the first move. And now, in your head, try and call out in advance every move that I'm going to make before I make it. Okay? So, first thing I'm going to do is here, right? Taking away 3 central squares and being a nice move away from him. He comes here. I'm going to follow my pattern. Now, this is really weird play by him. He's found a way to keep you from following your knight's pattern. So that shows that in chess you have to be willing to adapt a little bit. Your best move here is going to be to just cut him off by taking the second row. So you just play queen here, king comes here, and now you've got him cut off on the second row. And the way I finish this is I just bring my king out, and I chase him down with my king. And eventually he has to turn back. He can't run away forever. And then checkmate. Okay? One more time. Pick all the moves for white. Okay? We're going to start with the queen, with white's queen being over here. All right? So now, white's move. Right here. Also good moves would have been here or here, which would also be a nice move away, right? But I like to right away force him out of the center. All right, try and predict every move I'm going to play. Queen d4. Queen e3. Queen e4. Queen e5. Simple, right? Queen f4. Queen f5. Queen f6. Queen queen g5. And now, just time to bring in that king. Here he comes, folks. I think you all know what the last few moves are here. You can do it however you like now. Excellent. And that is really good. I suggest that you actually practice that a little bit. Okay? So there is actually a tool that you can use on Chess.com that allows you to practice fundamental positions, such as checkmating with a queen. So why don't you give it a try? You can try this even with a free membership. And just what you want to do with these kind of basic positions when you want to learn them is you want to do it successfully at least 3 times in a row before you move on to something else. So you've just watched this video on how to checkmate with king and queen against king. Don't assume that you've learned it unless you can successfully do it 3 times in a row. Okay? And really, 5 or 6 times is not a bad idea. It won't take you long once you get the hang of it. All right. I trust you will find this very, very useful, and good luck in your studies and your games. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.